Looking, huh? The manager's voice grew louder, more boastful. Well, we don't usually let people walk around here without the proper credentials, but I'll make an exception for you. Whoever you are. He looked at Keanu with a dismissive glance, clearly judging him based on his plain appearance. The manager was used to dealing with rich clients who walked into his dealership wearing the latest designer suits, but Keanu's unpretentious outfit clearly didn't fit that mold. Keanu felt the judgment in the air, but instead of showing any signs of irritation, he simply nodded. I'm just here for a quiet visit, no harm in that, right? The manager, taking Keanu's casual reply as a sign of submission, grew more arrogant. You know, we do have private suites for people like you. People who actually make the experience here special. His tone became more pointed, as though trying to humiliate Keanu without realizing who he was dealing with. Keanu looked at the man for a moment, processing the rudeness, but he kept his composure. It's just fine here, he said, his voice calm. I don't need a private suite. But the manager wasn't done. He leaned in a little closer, his voice becoming more cutting. I'm not sure you'll understand, but we sell cars to people who actually appreciate them. He motioned around the showroom where the expensive vehicles gleamed under the spotlights. Not everyone is cut out for this place, you know. Keanu stood still, a flicker of disappointment crossing his face. He had been in high-end settings like this before, but something about the manager's arrogance was different. It wasn't just about the cars. It was the judgment that came with them. He looked down at the floor for a moment, collecting his thoughts. But before he could speak, the manager's next words hit him like a slap. You're in the wrong place, buddy, the manager sneered. You should try a used car lot if you can't afford this kind of luxury. The words cut deeper than expected. Keanu, who had always kept a low profile, never showed signs of anger, but something in the manager's tone stirred something inside him. He was used to being underestimated because of his humility, but this was different. This wasn't just an assumption, it was an outright insult. The manager had no idea who he was talking to, and that was the problem. As Keanu processed the situation, something strange happened. The manager, completely oblivious to his rudeness, took a step forward and reached for the sleeve of Keanu's shirt, attempting to adjust it as though he was putting a coat on a child. You really should look more presentable, he muttered, as though he was doing Keanu a favor. In that moment, Keanu snapped, but not in the way anyone would have expected. Instead of getting angry, he simply turned toward the manager, his eyes cold, his voice calm yet firm. I don't need to impress anyone, Keanu said, standing up straighter now, facing the manager. I'm not here to be judged by you or anyone else. If you can't respect people based on who they are, regardless of how they look or what they wear, then maybe you're in the wrong business. The manager blinked, taken aback. His arrogance had completely blinded him to the fact that he was speaking to someone far more influential than he could ever imagine. Keanu turned to walk away, but the manager, now humiliated and scrambling to save face, followed him. Wait just a minute, the manager called after him, stepping forward, his hands outstretched in a vain attempt to stop Keanu. Look, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you, I thought you were another tire kicker, you know, someone who's just wasting time. Keanu didn't turn around. Instead, he glanced back over his shoulder and said, You've already shown me what I needed to know. It's not the cars that make a place special. It's the people, and you, my friend, are not someone I want to do business with. As Keanu walked out of the showroom, the other staff members stood in stunned silence, watching the scene unfold. Some of them had heard the manager's comments but had chosen to stay out of it. Others were too shocked to move. But what happened? Next was the true shocker. Keanu didn't leave the dealership. Instead, he walked directly to the counter where the receptionist sat. With a small, polite smile, he asked, How much for the Ferrari in the corner? The receptionist looked, confused for a second. I'm sorry, sir, I think that's the most expensive model we have in stock. Are you serious? I am, Keanu said, nodding. I'll take it. The receptionist, who still hadn't realized who she was speaking to, started typing the information into her computer. But the manager, who was now pale from embarrassment, rushed over, trying to stop the transaction. Wait, he called out, his voice desperate. I'm really sorry for how I treated you. Please let me make it up to you. He tried to block Keanu from the counter, but Keanu simply held up a hand to stop him. "I already made my decision," Keanu said, his voice firm, "and I'm not here for your apology. I just want the car." In that moment, the entire dealership staff realized what had just happened. Keanureeves, the unassuming actor they had underestimated, had just made a powerful statement. His presence wasn't about showing off or proving a point. It was about showing them the value of respect, humility, and the importance of never judging someone based on their appearance. Keanu finished his purchase and walked out of the dealership with the Ferrari, leaving the manager and staff speechless. They had learned a lesson that day, and it was a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. The punch came out of nowhere. The manager, consumed by a rush of misplaced arrogance, threw the punch with a sharp, quick movement, aimed directly at Keanu's face. Time seemed to slow as the hand hurtled toward him, but Keanu didn't flinch. Instead, with the grace and calm he was known for, he sidestepped the blow. The manager's fist sliced through the air, missing its target by mere inches, and collided with the air in front of him. The whole showroom seemed to pause for a moment. The other employees froze in shock, and customers turned their heads in disbelief. Some of them had recognized Keanu by now, but the full extent of the situation hadn't set in yet. Keanu stood his ground, his eyes locked on the manager's. There was no anger in his expression, only an icy calmness that contrasted sharply with the manager's seething fury. "You don't know who I am, do you?" Keanu said quietly, his voice a stark contrast to the rising tension. His tone wasn't one of confrontation, but one of quiet authority. The manager stood there for a moment, panting, his hand still clenched in a fist. He was too stunned by the fact that his punch had missed to immediately realize the gravity of his mistake. Keanu's calmness only made the situation more embarrassing for the manager. He had just thrown a punch at someone who was not only one of the most famous actors in the world, but also a person who had cultivated a reputation for humility and kindness, someone who had no reason to retaliate or get upset. The silence in the showroom was deafening. The other employees and customers were too stunned to move. But one person in the back of the room had recognized Keanu, and suddenly, the realization hit them like a ton of bricks. They knew who he was. "Wait," one of the employees whispered, eyes wide in shock. "That's Keanureeves." The manager's face drained of color. The recognition hit him like a slap. He had just punched Keanureeves, the owner of the dealership. Keanu wasn't just a random customer. He was the person who had quietly invested in and owned the luxury car dealership. The manager's brain struggled to process the situation. How could he have made such a massive mistake? Keanu didn't give the manager the satisfaction of watching him flounder. He wasn't here for a scene or a fight. He wasn't interested in drawing attention to himself or escalating the situation. He simply turned around and began walking toward the exit. "Keanu, wait," the manager finally stammered, realizing the colossal error he had just made. He took a hesitant step forward, his voice now trembling with panic. I'm sorry, I didn't know who you were. Please let me make it up to you. I didn't mean..." But Keanu's words stopped him before he could continue. He didn't turn back, but his voice rang out clearly through the showroom. "There's no need," Keanu said, his voice calm yet firm. "Respect is earned, not given. You don't have to make anything up to me. Just remember that next time. Be kind to everyone. It costs nothing." With that, Keanu kept walking, ignoring the manager's desperate apologies. He wasn't here to fight. He wasn't here to teach anyone a lesson with violence or confrontation. Instead, he silently left. The dealership and the hum of activity around him slowly resumed, but now there was an awkward tension hanging in the air. As Keanu stepped out into the sunlight, he was greeted by the cool breeze of the city, and with a calm sigh, he pulled his backpack straps higher on his shoulders. There was no need to make a scene. Keanu had always chosen to resolve things with dignity and humility. Walking away from the dealership, he was already thinking about the next step, the next car, the next journey. Back inside the showroom, the manager stood frozen, his mouth still open, trying to apologize to a man who had already disappeared. The reality of what he had just done finally started to settle in. He had let his ego get in the way, and it had cost him his job and his dignity. His boss, who had witnessed the entire interaction from a distance, now made his way over with a stern expression on his face. "Do you know who you just threw a punch at?" the boss asked, his voice low and disappointed. "That's Keanureeves, the owner of this dealership. You've just cost yourself more than a job. Do you have any idea how much respect he's given us over the years, and you insulted him?" The manager's face turned red with embarrassment. He didn't know how to respond. The words had no meaning anymore. His actions had spoken, louder than any apology he could offer. The realization hit him that respect, in the end, didn't come from a position of power, but from the simple act of treating others with kindness and humility. Something he had completely failed to. As for Keanu, he continued his day as he had planned, unbothered by the incident. He didn't need to dwell on the mistake of one arrogant man. Instead, he kept moving forward with grace, as always. It was just another reminder that, in the face of disrespect, the best response is to rise above it and lead with humility. Keanu didn't need to prove anything to anyone. His character spoke for itself. Keanu stood motionless, the room still echoing with the impact of the punch. The sting of the blow on his cheek was nothing compared to the emotional weight of the situation. His calm demeanor never wavered. In fact, he seemed almost at peace. As the small trickle of blood slowly ran down his lip, he wiped it away with the back of his hand, his face as serene as it had been before the incident. The silence in the room was deafening, the tension palpable, as all eyes remained fixed on him. For a moment, the manager stood frozen, still processing the scene. He had expected Keanu to react in anger, perhaps fight back or at least storm out. After all, this was a celebrity, someone who had been adored by millions worldwide. He thought that a punch, however unprovoked, would break the actors. Calm would shatter the image of the humble man before him. But what happened next was the complete opposite of what the manager had anticipated. Keanu finally spoke, his voice calm and steady, cutting through the silence. "I've been in much worse situations than this," he said, his words soft but carrying an undeniable weight. "I'm not here to fight. I just wanted to buy a car." The manager, who had been gloating moments earlier, now stood pale and wide-eyed, realizing the enormity of his actions. The words hit him like a ton of bricks, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his arrogance. His confidence shattered, and the reality of what he had done became too much to bear. He had physically attacked someone far more dignified than he could ever be, and now, there was no way to take it back. As Keanu stood there, not angry, but incredibly composed, the police officers who had been quietly observing the entire interaction moved in. They had been standing at the edge of the showroom, sensing the escalating tension, but it wasn't until Keanu spoke that they decided it was time to step forward. They made their way toward the manager, but Keanu, ever the voice of reason, did something that no one could have predicted. Instead of escalating the situation, instead of calling for the authorities or demanding the manager be arrested, Keanu simply turned and addressed the officers. "There's no need for this," he said, his tone calm and collected. "I don't want to make a scene. I don't need anyone to be arrested. I'm just here for a car. Let's all just move forward, okay?" The officers, taken aback by the actor's level-headedness, nodded but remained vigilant. Keanu's refusal to let the situation spiral further was not only surprising, but deeply humbling. The manager, still reeling from his impulsive actions, couldn't believe the restraint Keanu was showing. Most people in his position would have been outraged, calling for immediate punishment. But Keanu, he was choosing peace over retribution, a trait so rare in today's world. Keanu turned back toward the manager, who was still speechless, unable to make eye contact. "I understand things happen in the heat of the moment," Keanu continued, his voice sincere but firm. "But you don't need to treat people like that. I know the world can be tough, but we can all be better than this." There was a long pause as the manager swallowed hard, his face flushed with shame. Keanu's words had cut deeper than any punch could. Here was a man who had everything: fame, wealth, success, Yet he chose humility, dignity, and kindness, even in the face of disrespect. The manager finally found his voice, though it trembled. I'm sorry, I've been an idiot. I don't know what came over me. His words were barely audible, and there was a noticeable crack in his voice. He took a step toward Keanu, his hands outstretched in apology. Please, let me make it right. Whatever you need. I'll make sure you get the best treatment here. You deserve the best. Keanu didn't respond right away, but his expression softened. He could see that the manager was truly remorseful, that the humiliation of his actions had dawned on him. Keanu wasn't looking for an apology, but the simple recognition of one's wrongs was enough to show that the manager had learned something profound from this moment. I don't need anything from you, Keanu said with a small, forgiving smile. I just hope you remember this moment. Treat others with respect, no matter who they are. With that, Keanu turned and walked toward the door, leaving the dealership behind him. The manager stood there, frozen, realizing that Keanu had just taught him a lesson that would stay with him forever. There would be no headlines, no viral moments, just a quiet reminder that kindness and restraint in the face of aggression speak louder than any confrontation. As Keanu left the dealership, his calm demeanor and decision to walk away rather than escalate the situation sent a powerful message to everyone who witnessed the encounter. The lesson was clear. True strength comes not from showing force, but from showing grace, understanding, and the ability to rise above when provoked. The dealership would never be the same after that day. The manager, deeply affected by the encounter, vowed to be better, to treat everyone with the respect they deserved. And as for Keanu, he didn't need to be recognized as a hero. He was just doing what he believed in, choosing peace over conflict, kindness over arrogance. It was a lesson that in the end would change more than just one man's day. Instead of causing a scene or calling for the authorities, Keanu did something that shocked everyone in the showroom. The tension in the air was palpable, with onlookers watching intently, unsure of what would happen next. But Keanu, ever the picture of composure, didn't take the expected route. He simply looked at the manager with a deep, almost understanding gaze, as if he could see the frustration and insecurity behind the man's rude behavior. His calm demeanor was in stark contrast to the anger and arrogance that had defined the manager's actions. Keanu's voice was quiet, but steady, with a warmth that reached far beyond the simple words he spoke. I don't hold grudges, Keanu said, his tone soft and genuine. I see someone here who is just looking for respect, and I can offer that to you. The manager's face went pale. He had expected Keanu to lash out, to retaliate with words or actions, to put him in his place the way so many others might have done in such a situation. But instead, he was met with kindness and understanding, qualities that in that moment felt like a punch to his own pride. The manager's bravado, which had been so firmly in place moments earlier, crumbled instantly. I'm sorry, the manager stammered, his voice cracking slightly. The sharp, confident tone he had carried with him throughout the confrontation was now gone, replaced by genuine remorse. I didn't mean to. He trailed off, unsure of how to finish his sentence. Keanu nodded gently, his expression still calm but tinged with empathy. He wasn't looking for an apology, nor did he need one. What Keanu wanted in that moment was simple: to move beyond the situation, to show the manager that he didn't have to act out of arrogance to prove his worth. It's okay, Keanu said quietly, his voice full of grace. We all have our bad days, no one's perfect. But it's important to remember that kindness is the way forward. The manager stood speechless, processing Keanu's words, the weight of the situation sinking in. He realized he had crossed a line, and not just with Keanu, but with his own values. For a moment, the showroom felt still, as if time had paused, allowing the manager to reflect on what had just transpired. Keanu, without another word, took a step back, signaling the end of the interaction. He didn't need to stand there and make a point. His message had already been delivered. With a small, understanding smile, he turned to walk toward the door. The officers, who had been silently observing the entire exchange, took a step back, their eyes widening with respect. They too recognized the shift in the air. What they had expected to be an ugly confrontation had turned into a lesson in humility and grace. As Keanu walked past them, they made no move to stop him, silently acknowledging the peace he had brought to a situation that could have easily escalated into something far worse. Keanu's steps were measured, his posture unhurried, as if he had already moved on from the drama that had briefly filled the air. The showroom, once filled with tension, now seemed quieter, more reflective. As Keanu reached the door, he paused just for a moment. He turned slightly to look back at the manager, who was still standing in place, his face a mix of regret and contemplation. Keanu gave him one last gentle nod before stepping out into the world beyond the showroom. The door closed behind him with a soft chime, and for the first time that afternoon, the room seemed to exhale. Inside the dealership, the manager stood still, lost in thought. He knew he had acted wrongly, and though Keanu had left without asking for anything in return, his actions had already made a profound impact. It wasn't the apology that had mattered. It wasn't the punch he had thrown or the mistake he had made. What truly mattered was the quiet lesson Keanu had imparted in that moment. That respect and kindness were the keys to moving forward. That sometimes the greatest strength wasn't in lashing out, but in choosing peace. The other employees, who had witnessed the entire encounter, exchanged glances. Some of them had seen a side of Keanu they hadn't fully appreciated before. Not the actor, not the celebrity, but the man. His response to the confrontation had shown them a level of maturity and humility that they hadn't expected. It wasn't about being the bigger person in the traditional sense. It was about recognizing the humanity in others, even when they made mistakes. As the manager slowly turned and walked away from the spot where Keanu had just been, he knew his perspective had changed. The pride that had defined him before now seemed irrelevant. What mattered was how he treated others, and the lesson Keanu had taught him that day would be something he carried with him for a long time. Outside the dealership, Keanureeves disappeared into the quiet hum of the city, his calm presence a reminder that sometimes the most powerful response to disrespect was simply to rise above it, with dignity and understanding. The next day, as the dealership staff went about their regular duties, there was a palpable tension in the air. The events of the previous day had left a mark, and everyone knew that things would never be the same. The manager, visibly shaken and remorseful, had spent the night reflecting on his actions. He knew he had made a huge mistake, not just with Keanu but with himself. His own arrogance and impulsive behavior had cost him a chance to interact with someone he now realized was far more than just a movie star. The manager walked into the staff room, his face solemn. The employees looked up, surprised by his serious expression. He cleared his throat before speaking, his voice filled with sincerity. "I want to apologize to all of you, especially for what happened yesterday. I let my pride and assumptions get in the way of doing what was right. I judged someone based on their appearance, and it cost me more than just a moment of embarrassment. It was a failure of character." He paused for a moment, letting the weight of his words sink in. "I'm sorry to have set such a poor example, and I promise to do better moving forward." The room was quiet for a few seconds before one of the employees spoke up. "We've all seen the way you've handled things, and it's not like you to act that way. But Keanu's actions yesterday really put things into perspective. He handled it all with such grace." Another employee nodded in agreement. The manager sighed deeply, a mix of regret and understanding on his face. "I know. And that's exactly why what happened yesterday wasn't just about one rude customer. It was about me forgetting what matters most. Kindness, humility, and the way we treat people no matter who they are." The staff exchanged glances, some of them visibly moved by the manager's humility. They all knew that the lesson had been learned not just by the manager, but by everyone in the room. That was the first step, acknowledging the mistake. The real work, however, would come in changing how they approached every customer, from the highest profile ones to the everyday, people who walked through their doors. Just as the manager was about to walk out of the staff room, a phone call interrupted the moment. He picked up the receiver and listened carefully. His face softened, a mix of surprise and gratitude crossing his features. The phone call ended, and he looked around the room, a smile slowly spreading across his face. "Guess who just walked through the door?" he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "Keanureeves is here. He's come back." The staff was stunned. After everything that had transpired the day before, no one expected Keanu to return to the dealership. There was no reason for him to, but Keanu had surprised everyone. When the staff rushed out into the showroom to greet him, Keanu stood there, as calm and composed as ever. But what happened next was even more surprising than his return. Instead of walking toward the luxury vehicles, Keanu made his way directly to the counter. He pulled a piece of paper from his bag and handed it to the manager. "I'd like to buy a coffee machine for your waiting area," Keanu said with a smile. "It's a small gesture, but I think it will make a difference for your customers and your staff." The manager, unable to hide his astonishment, took the paper in disbelief. It was an order for a high-end espresso machine, something the dealership had never had before. The waiting area, which had always been functional but uninspiring, would now have a touch of luxury that matched the cars in the showroom. "You don't have to do this," the manager said, genuinely moved. "After everything that happened yesterday, I'm the one who should be apologizing to you. You've done so much more than I could ever expect." Keanu shrugged, his eyes filled with warmth. Sometimes it's the small gestures that make the biggest difference. It's not about making up for anything, it's about setting the right tone. Kindness is the greatest luxury we can offer. The manager's eyes welled up with emotion. He was overwhelmed by Keanu's generosity and his ability to turn a negative experience into something positive. Keanu had taught him the true meaning of humility, and he felt a deep sense of gratitude. As Keanu made his way toward the door, the staff stood quietly, observing the scene. It was more than just a celebrity buying a coffee machine. It was about the message Keanu had sent, that kindness, understanding, and humility were qualities that could change lives, especially when things were at their worst. The manager turned to his staff, a newfound sense of purpose in his eyes. "We have a lot to learn from this. Let's make sure we never forget the lessons we learned from Keanu. He didn't just walk in as a celebrity. He walked in as a person who understands that it's the little things that truly matter." Keanu's visit had left an unforgettable impact on everyone at the dealership. It wasn't just about the coffee machine. It was about the way he had handled the situation, with grace and generosity, teaching everyone a powerful lesson about respect and the importance of treating people with kindness, no matter who they are. That day, the dealership wasn't just selling luxury cars. It was selling something even more important, the idea that kindness was the greatest luxury of all.